Imagine a version of basketball where dribbling is illegal, where the court is chopped into pieces, and where scoring more than 1 point a possession is basically a miracle. Now picture that same sport, decades later, producing players who can throw down a two-handed dunk in front of a sold-out arena. That is not a different sport. That is women's basketball. And the journey from one to the other is one of the wildest stories in the history of the game. Welcome back to Basketball Daily. If you love the game, the history behind it, and the players who built it from nothing, you are exactly where you need to be. Today we are doing something a little different. We are stepping away from highlights and stat lines to tell the full story of women's basketball, how it started, how it almost got lost in a mess of conflicting rules, and how it exploded into the powerful, high-flying league we watch today. Stick around, because by the end of this video you are going to look at every women's basketball game differently. Let's set the scene. Basketball itself was invented in 1891 by Dr. James Naismith at a YMCA training school in Massachusetts. That part most fans already know. What a lot of people do not know is that women's basketball started almost immediately after, just 1 year later. This was not some slow burn addition to the sport. Women wanted in from day one. Here is how it happened. Naismith published his 13 original rules in January of 1892. Almost as soon as those rules hit paper, a physical education instructor named Senda Berenson, working at nearby Smith College, read them and saw an opportunity. She did not just copy the men's rules and hand them to her students. She rewrote them. Her goal was to introduce basketball to women while cutting down on roughness, because at the time, there was real concern about safety, about the clothing women wore to play in, and honestly, about outside observers watching women compete in ways that made people at the time uncomfortable. So Berenson split the court into 3 equal sections, and players had to stay in their assigned zone. Stealing the ball was banned outright. You could not hold on to the ball for more than 3 seconds, and dribbling was capped at 3 bounces. Compare that to today, where players cross half the court in 3 dribbles without even thinking about it, and you start to understand just how different this early version of the game really was. But Berenson's rules were not the only version floating around. This is where things get interesting, because women's basketball did not have one unified rulebook. It had several, all competing at once. A woman named Clara Gregory Baer, a physical culture instructor at Sophie Newcomb College in New Orleans, published her own set of women's rules, and hers were even stricter and stranger than Berenson's. At the time, the sport was even called basket under her system before that name was eventually dropped. Baer's rules divided the court based on how many players were on each side. You could have 11 sections for 11 players, 7 sections for 7 players, and so on. There was no dribbling allowed at all. There was no guarding. Players got 6 seconds to aim and take their shot, and there were no backboards. You could only run while the ball was in the air, and only for a few steps. After every score, offense and defense would actually switch ends of the court. And here is a detail that should blow your mind. A one-handed push shot was required under Baer's rules, more than 40 years before the one-handed shot became a defining move in the men's game. Meanwhile, a two-handed shot or a two-handed pass was called as a foul. Baer's rules actually spread widely across the American South and stuck around in some places until 1922. So now you have got 2 completely different systems, Berenson's version and Baer's version, both trying to define what women's basketball should look like. And that confusion did not stop there. In 1899, a group of leaders including Luther Gulick met at a physical training conference in Springfield and decided enough was enough. It was time to form an actual committee to unify the rules for women's basketball. With input from the players themselves, that committee settled on new guidelines allowing anywhere from 5 to 10 players per side, and in 1901 those rules were published by the Spalding Athletic Library alongside both Baer's rules and the men's rules, all bundled together. It was chaos. So much so that even Baer reportedly admitted the sport was getting confusing before it had barely gotten started on a national scale. From there, the changes kept coming year after year. Between 1903 and 1904, game time was shortened from 20 minutes down to 15 in the first official revision from the Unified Committee. Then, between 1905 and 1906, the National Women's Basketball Committee became part of what we now know as AAPERD, the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation and Dance. That was a massive step forward for legitimizing the women's game in a short window of time. And then came a rule change that is almost impossible to picture today. In 1910, dribbling was eliminated from the women's game entirely. Gone. It did not return until the 1913 to 1914 season. Try to imagine watching a basketball game with zero dribbling. No crossovers, no fast breaks off the bounce, nothing. Just passing and positioning. It is wild to think that was the sport for multiple seasons. Then in 1916, another rule shows up that feels almost unthinkable now. Coaches were not allowed to coach from the sidelines during live play. You got your one shot to give instructions at halftime, and after that, your team was on its own for the rest of each half. No timeouts full of strategy, no sideline adjustments in real time. Just whatever game plan you managed to install during the break. From 1917 all the way to 1969, the rules kept shifting in smaller ways, enough changes that you could genuinely make an entire separate video just cataloging them one by one. But the real turning point, the one that starts to make the sport look like the one we know today, comes in the 1969 to 1970 season. That is when 5-player full-court games combined with a 30-second shot clock were permitted for the first time, and the format held for a second season after that. This is the moment the women's game starts feeling fast, dynamic, and closer to what fans were used to seeing on the men's side, with players finally able to run the full length of the floor. Fast forward to 1987, and the three-point line officially becomes part of the women's game, set at 19 feet 9 inches from the center of the basket. That single addition changed the scoring rhythm of the sport permanently, giving teams a new way to swing momentum and giving shooters a new way to make their name. Now here is the important thing to understand about all of this history. Make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite player from the list we covered, and subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one. Follow us on all our socials linked down in the description to stay locked in, because Basketball Daily is bringing you more history, more player breakdowns, more training content, and more of everything basketball, every single day. Remember, someone out there is always working. Are you?